neglecting the basic physical or medical needs of the child, etc. Don't be harsh and critical of the mother for meaningless, minor things because it makes you look controlling and petty. For example, if your toddler falls and hits his head, don't accuse the mother of the fall unless she was doing drugs in the other room. Toddlers fall. They can happen during your parenting time, too. So, if something happens during your parenting time, and you would be insulted to be labeled a negligent parent, then don't accuse the mother of that either. Thinking this way makes you come off as a responsible grown-up, instead of as a petty litigant. And hold the mother to that high ethical standard, too. Also, analyze your own weaknesses and how the mother plans to attack you as a bad parent. You have to be prepared to explain those things. Either prove them false, or, if they're true, explain the total context around the incidents and how you learned from them. If the mother's complaints about you are petty, then show them to the judge as petty, to make her look like a petty litigant instead of a loving parent. Think about the future. Until your child is 18, what do you need to provide your child so that he has the best chance to become an emotionally stable, contributing member of society and the best person that he can become? Talk about their future education and social development. You want to show the judge that you're actively thinking about your child's future. You want the judge to know that you'll take the necessary actions to promote your child's well-being. The fact that you talk about what we'll do over the next 5 to 10 years will be a great indication.
Because that's how every goddamn conversation goes with.
In the mother's testimony, she didn't discuss what she would do to raise our son to be the best he can be. She just primarily focused on her false allegations of my domestic violence and on her ability to change the child's diapers and feed him when he was a baby. Fully prepare for your case. Once you identify the key best interest factors that relate to your case, then you'll go ahead and create summaries for your strengths and weaknesses, and the mother's strengths and weaknesses related to each individual factor. And when you present it in your testimony to prove your case, you'll need to present 3 things. Your testimony and stories about you, the mother, and the child, documented evidence to back up your testimony, if available, witnesses that can testify to back up your testimony. I was extremely methodical about organizing my thoughts and preparing my case. You should think about your case in a very structured way to organize all of this information for the judge. The judge is your audience, and so are the outside of court, which I discussed in episode 4B. When you present your case, be very detailed, because the judge and the court employees don't know they have no clue about what happened in the home. So prepare this as if you're making a presentation to a completely uninformed person. The judge can't read your mind. Be very clear and assertive about the facts. You don't need physical documented evidence for every story you're going to tell. Documented proof is a very important added bonus. You might have documented evidence for 25% of your testimony, or maybe 50%, or 75%. The more the better. But don't feel that you need to back up everything you say with evidence. You should feel confident that when you tell truthful stories with clear and convincing details, that can be sufficient. After all, the mother is in the same exact position as you in terms of documented versus undocumented testimony. So if you have evidence, bring it in to back up your story. If you don't have evidence, tell your story anyway. If you have a witness confirming your story, that also helps. The best witnesses are often neutral witnesses, like a teacher, a therapist, or a babysitter. The judge probably assumes that your family and best friends will only say nice things about you. But if your family and best friends are necessary to testify about the mother's domestic violence or anger management problems or other parenting issues, then you need to use those witnesses. You also need positive witnesses who have seen you parenting your children. Family and friends are good, but neutral witnesses can be better because they don't have a vested interest in you personally. In our next episode, we will discuss my first day in family court. which is extremely important because temporary orders usually last a long time. And we'll also get into the trial timeline and what happens during the 3 years of your trial, because you need to plan for all of those events. These might be the darkest days of your life, and I'm making these educational videos to help you navigate this nightmare. If you subscribe, you can get updates when I post more videos. Thank you for liking, subscribing, and sharing with your friends who are in a similar situation. If you like, subscribe, and share, that'll also help the YouTube algorithm get this message out to more fathers in our position.
Get it. School's back in session, and the juggle is real. But with our hardworking gummies, you can take some of the work out of homework. You can keep your job, even when things are not so chill. And when it's bedtime, you can tuck them in without getting tuckered out. So you, all of you, can get 8+ sleep. This back-to-school season, you've got this with gummies for the little wins.
The history of slavery is a painful reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty and oppression. Slavery in America was deeply entrenched from the colonial era through the antebellum period, with enslaved Africans and their descendants subjected to forced labor, physical punishment, and various forms of degradation. The term antebellum derives from Latin, where ante means before, and bellum means war. In the context of American history, the antebellum era refers to the period before the American Civil War, specifically the years between the late 18th century, which was after the War of 1812, all the way down to the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. The term antebellum era is commonly used to describe this period because it captures the distinct social, economic, and political characteristics of the time, which ultimately led to the conflict and division that resulted in the Civil War. It was a time of significant growth and transformation in the United States, marked by industrialization, westward expansion, and debates over slavery. Yes, slavery. The antebellum South was characterized by the use of slavery and the culture it fostered. During the procession of this era, Southern intellectuals and leaders gradually shifted from portraying slavery as an embarrassing and temporary system to a defense of slavery as a positive good. And for this, the abolitionist movement, which had just come into existence then, was harshly criticized by these leaders for being in opposition to slavery. The demand for slave labor and the U.S. ban on importing more slaves from Africa drove up prices for slaves, making it profitable for smaller farms in older settled areas, such as Virginia, to sell their slaves further south and west. Most farmers in the South had small to medium-sized farms with few slaves, but the large plantation owners' wealth, often reflected in the number of slaves they owned, afforded them considerable prestige and political power. During the antebellum era, the nation grappled with issues such as states' rights, the expansion of slavery into new territories, and tensions between the North and the South. These factors contributed to the eventual outbreak of the Civil War, which had a profound and lasting impact on the country. However, while the dehumanization and mistreatment of slaves is well documented, with ample evidence of sexual relations, from rapes to what appears to be relatively symbiotic romantic partnerships between white slave masters and black women in the antebellum South, a lesser-known aspect is the abuse endured by black male slaves at the hands of elite white women, that is, the planter class women. Yes, that too occurred. The planter class white women refers to a specific group of women who belonged to the elite plantation-owning class in the American South of the United States during the antebellum era. These women were associated with wealthy plantation owners, predominantly focused on cultivating cash crops such as cotton, tobacco, and rice, and relied heavily on slave labor. These wealthy plantation owners were referred to as the planter class, while their wives, who held privileged positions within the social hierarchy of the time, were the planter class white women. However, using an intersectional socio-historical analysis, this very video delves into the often overlooked history of the exploitation and mistreatment faced by black male slaves, exploring the factors that may have contributed to the incidence of sexual encounters between the planter class white women and slave men, the power dynamics embedded in them, and their implications in terms of sexual consent. The segment further demonstrates how these upper-class white women engaged in these relationships use sex as an instrument of power, simultaneously perpetuating both white supremacy and patriarchy during this dark era. Before we get right into this proper, kindly hit the like button in front of you, share to keep spreading these eye-opening contents, and subscribe. You just remember that all you have to do is sit back and relax while we unravel for your giving today the uncommon story of the planter-class white women and the remarkable abuse black male slaves encountered at their hands. Now let us begin. The intersection of power and gender slavery was not only a system defined by racial subjugation, but also one that reinforced gender hierarchies. While the planter-class white women in the antebellum South were bound by societal expectations of femininity, they still held significant power within the context of slavery. These women played active roles in maintaining and perpetuating the institution. The authority they wielded extended to the management and treatment of enslaved individuals, including black male slaves. White women had the power to issue commands, give instructions, and enforce discipline within their homes and on plantations. It is of great relevance to note that in the American South before the Civil War, white women couldn't vote. They couldn't hold office. When they married, their property technically belonged to their husbands. But there was one thing they could do, just as white men could. They could buy, sell, and own enslaved people. In the book, They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South, authored by Stephanie Jones Rogers, the historian makes the case that white women were far from being passive bystanders in the business of slavery, as previous historians have argued. Rather, they were active participants, shoring up their own economic power through ownership of the enslaved. In the past, historians had often based their conclusions about white women's role in slavery on the writings of a small subset of white Southern women. But Jones Rogers, who happens to be an associate professor of history at the University of California, Berkeley, drew on a different source this time from interviews with formerly enslaved people conducted during the Great Depression as part of the Federal Writers Project, an arm of the Works Progress Administration. These interviews, Jones Rogers writes, show that white girls were trained in slave ownership, discipline, and mastery, sometimes from birth, even being given it.
Are you looking for a way to stay connected to your mail and packages from anywhere, 24/7? For one, right now, we manage everything through an app, except postal mail. So when you go out of town for business, vacation, or whatever it is you do, it's impossible to receive and manage your mail in a timely manner. Well, with iPostal One, you get a digital mailbox service that allows you to view and manage your mail with an app or online the day it is received at your iPostal One mail center. Choose a real street physical mailing address from thousands of locations in the U.S. or other countries, where your mail and packages are securely received. Easily forward, scan mail content, or just start mail on demand. You can even pick it up whenever it's convenient. Get a digital mailbox with iPostal One starting at only $9.99 a month and stay connected to your mail no matter where you are. Upgrade your mail experience today at iPostal1.com.
Given enslaved people as gifts when they were as young as 9 months old. White slave-holding parents train their daughters on how to be slave owners. They give them lessons in slave discipline and slave management. Some even allow for their daughters to mete out physical punishments, Jones Rogers says. Slave-holding parents and slave-holding family members gave girls enslaved people as gifts, for Christmas sometimes, when they turned 16, when they turned 21. There are even accounts of slave-holding parents and family members giving white female infants enslaved people as their own. There is one particular instance of a case in a court record where a woman talks about how her grandfather gave her an enslaved person as her own when she was merely 9 months old. And just how could a 9-month-old baby have known that she had a slave of her own if she wasn't told so? Apparently, she has been schooled on the ropes. She grew up knowing that some absolute authority over another has been bestowed on her, that she had some waiting property of her own in the form of a human being. Stated a poet and writer on his findings in the book, They Were Her Property, by Jones Rogers. Such children grow up not even recognizing black slaves as fellow human beings. These exact nurturings have majorly contributed, no doubt, to the creation of highly racist and supremacist personalities in societies at large. Some deeply faulty mental structure this is, which must be destructured. A mentality that must be visited and revisited to create a new mindset, the kind that would at the end of the day see and regard all as equal. Sexual exploitation. One of the most distressing aspects of the abuse endured by black male slaves at the hands of elite white women was sexual exploitation. Although the dominant narrative often portrays white women as passive or innocent, there were instances where they actively engaged in non-consensual sexual relationships and rape, exploiting their power and control over black male slaves. These actions perpetuated the cycle of sexual violence and degradation, further dehumanizing the already enslaved. Here's one example of such many cases found in the autobiography, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, where the author Harriet Jacobs, who being once a slave, talks about how planters' daughters would take advantage of male slaves. They know that the women slaves are subject to their father's authority in all things, and in some cases they exercise the same authority over the men slaves. I have myself seen the master of such a household whose head was bowed down in shame, for it was known in the neighborhood that his daughter had selected one of the meanest slaves on his plantation to be the father of his first grandchild. She did not make her advances to her equals, nor even to her father's more intelligent servants. She selected the most brutalized, over whom her authority could be exercised with less fear of exposure. The kind of relationship described here by the author is clearly of a sexually predatory behavior. And such an act, as Jacobs confirms, was not uncommon, nor can it be classified as consensual in any meaningful sense of the word. It, in fact, constitutes a form of sexual abuse, if not rape. We thus see that plantation mistresses and elite women, like their male counterparts, were able to sexually control and abuse their slaves. Another way in which the planter-class white women were able to exercise sexual control over slaves was by threatening to accuse them of rape or attempted rape if they did not agree to sex. In doing this, elite white women used one of the primary instruments of patriarchal repression, the idea that they were weak and in need of white male protection, and by extension, in need of control and domination by white men, to exercise racial control over black male slaves. Possible causes of sexual exploitation. Why these women chose to sexually abuse slaves probably varied by situation. Perhaps some of them were simply bored or sexually frustrated. But perhaps, at least on a subconscious level, sexually exploiting slaves was a means of compensating for their lack of power in other aspects of their lives. Planter-class women were considered the property of their husbands and lacked considerable sexual agency relative to men. It is possible the sexual exploitation of slaves by women who had little power in relation to white men was a source of enjoyment that created a feeling of power. This is not to excuse the actions of sexually abusive white women, nor is it to suggest that female sexual abuse of slave men would not have occurred had women enjoyed a higher status in society. However, just as slave-owning white women often took out their frustrations on slaves through excessive cruelty and violence, they probably also used sex as a means of domination and control in a society in which they were relatively powerless. Their freedom and mobility was severely limited. For example, they were generally not allowed to travel without an older male chaperone. Spousal abuse was often considered a legitimate method for men to control their wives in the antebellum era. Indeed, in private, many plantation women were unhappy with their lack of freedom and the expectation that they remain dutiful, obedient, pleasant, and cheerful, while their husbands had affairs with or raped female slaves. Knowing that the mixed race slave children who surrounded them were their husbands' offspring was both humiliating and heartbreaking. Historian Catherine Clinton, 1982, has this to say: if plantation mistresses could live above reproach, their husbands, fathers, sons, and brothers would boast of the superiority of their civilization. She further goes ahead and terms them prisoners in disguise. Southern women, who generally married at a younger age than those in the North, not infrequently at 15 or 16 years old, were often left abandoned on plantations while their husbands traveled for business, pleasure, or military duty. The life of a plantation mistress was often lonely and sad. Physical abuse. By 1830, slavery was primarily located in the South, where it existed in many different forms. African Americans were enslaved on small farms, large plantations, in cities and towns, inside homes, out in the fields, in the industry.
Partnership is critical to ensuring patient health. We need to empower dental professionals, give them scientific information, making sure that patients are cared for. Our passion is this work.
It is exciting to really improve people's lives.
Industry and transportation. Though slavery had such a wide variety of faces, the underlying concepts were always the same. Slaves were considered property, and they were property because they were black. Their status as property lived together within these parameters, and their lives together took many forms. Physical violence was not limited to white male slaveholders. White women, too, participated in acts of brutality against black male slaves. These acts ranged from whipping and beating to inflicting other forms of corporal punishment, leaving lasting physical and psychological